Some of you may not realize that I was a graphic designer and freelancer long before I was ever a YouTube content creator with 500,000 subscribers. It is actually the thing that allowed me to transition from retail work into having an actual career and profession. And it would actually take me much further in life than I could have ever anticipated. And this video is kind of a video that is one of those one for them, one for me type deals. I want to talk about why I became a graphic designer and a little bit about my early journey, the impact that it's had on me, how it allowed me to become an entrepreneur later with a multiple six-figure business, earning about $25,000 a month as of 2020. And I also made a video about that and how I spend my income if you're curious about that sort of thing. I'll link it in the description for you. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about my background in graphic design as well as photography. Now, something you need to understand is that I came from, a single parent home, child of divorce, the oldest of four kids, and grew up in an immigrant family. So you can imagine that in my life, school was something that was very important for a long time until it wasn't. Ultimately, I found myself very depressed and disenchanted in my last 2 years of high school. I had a lot going on at home. There was a very specific health situation with my sister and her having surgeries. And I was also getting bullied and harassed a lot. And I mean a lot while I was at school. And I also had some teachers that frankly just were not always great. I think some of you might be able to relate to this. The kind of people who tell you like things, the worst things they possibly could tell you about yourself, and you internalize that and believe it. So it wasn't going great for me. I also was starting to come to the realization that a dream that I had of becoming an animator and a cartoonist and working for Disney and Marvel came to the realization that I felt I didn't have the talent for that. And then financially, I didn't have the resources to truly pursue it at the highest level and make up for any natural talent that I was lacking. So I thought about it and I ultimately decided that I still wanted to do something as a career that I was passionate about, something as a career that really relied heavily on my creativity, because I wanted to be the person in my family that didn't live for their nights and weekends and actually pursued their creativity as a full-time income. And so what I ultimately decided was my interest and fascination and love of graphic design and web design was what I was going to pursue upon leaving high school. And so I went to college for advertising and graphic design, and I was in a small military town near Fort Bragg, okay? You could kind of feel how interesting it was for me growing up. I was a military brat who had moved all over the place. I was born in Brooklyn, and to be in this smaller town, which I grew up in a lot of small towns, I never fit in, like at all. I was a creative nerd, art nerd, science nerd. It wasn't going well for me, okay? However, in college, I went to a community college. I had to work to be able to pay for that because I did not want to take out any student loans. I didn't want to go into debt. I saw too many horror stories. And so I just worked my tail off. It meant I was constantly exhausted and overworked. You want to talk about burnout? You want to talk about hustle? I lived through a version of that maybe 20 years ago that I don't even think people can fully relate to and appreciate today, because it was a very different time and it meant a very different thing back then. Maybe some of you do understand and can relate, but those of you who are older, I'm 37, I think a lot of you understand where I'm coming from. So back then, back in my day, everything was harder and everything was much more cost prohibitive. Opportunities weren't raining from the sky or from the internet. Like, for real. It was very difficult to find ways to side hustle and make money. There wasn't websites like Fiverr. There wasn't a YouTube yet. That wouldn't happen for many, many years. We're talking about 2002 here. YouTube wouldn't be invented until 2005, wouldn't be acquired until 2006, and wouldn't become popularized until about roughly 2014. So that wasn't really on the table. However, by the fact that in high school itself, I had learned how to code before I was even a freshman. I was learning the skills of web design and graphic design on the very primitive internet that AOL was at the time. And so I actually had an understanding of these things, and a teacher, there are good teachers. Don't ever get me twisted on that. There are some great teachers. I had a teacher that took an interest in me and introduced me at a very young age to things like Photoshop and Premiere Pro and things like that. And so I had a background in video editing before YouTube ever existed. I had already been passionate about, photography since I was a child. It was something that both of my parents did as a hobby. My, uncles did it. My uncle Charlie actually taught me how to develop film in the darkroom because he had a whole studio set up and thing in his basement in Florida. And so he taught me how to develop film and shoot film at a very young age. And in college, I was one of the last people to actually use the wet lab and develop, traditional film before we went to a digital studio setup. So this all goes back, way back for me to even my early years as a teenager. So it's something that has always been with me. I've been an artist, an illustrator, a creative writer. I've been doing storytelling and creativity and visual art and design my entire life. So it wasn't a stretch for me to pursue graphic design, what people used to call commercial arts and commercial illustration. And I took a lot of electives in illustration and photography. My biggest frustration was probably the fact that my graphic design teachers, software was new to them back then. They all came from print shops. They'd worked in print shops 10, 15 years ago, were now academics. They weren't necessarily practitioners. And that's no offense to any of them. It's just something that then was frustrating for me as someone who was coming up in the world where software exists and not having any real guidance or mentorship directly, even though that's what I was paying for by going to college. I wasn't really getting what I was hoping for. What I was getting was access to resources, though. I was getting access to the Mac Lab. I was getting access to other software that I hadn't been using, like Adobe Illustrator and Adobe InDesign. And at the time, Macromedia Dreamweaver and Flash. And that actually allowed me to at least pursue a little bit of animation and even make a decent animated short at one point. And this is, again, in the early years. And unfortunately, this is something, or maybe fortunately, because it was really not that good, lost to the sea of time, okay? Exist only in my memories. So I really got started at an early age, and I was freelancing and I was making stuff for churches and local businesses. This included print flyers, print ads, even websites. A lot of people, what we do is, in fact, actually even some of my photography and video stuff, I came up with some of that in the church. This is how a lot of us get our start. And so when you end up doing that kind of thing in your local community, you start to build a little bit of a reputation for it. I got to also help with my tech skills, set people's offices and network and stuff like that as more people started building that out. And so I got a lot of experience and a lot of exposure doing those things. And it wasn't a lot of money, but from a broke kid in a small town, something's better than nothing. You fast forward to my early to mid 20s, and I end up leaving college directly to work for a local company doing web hosting that I was planning to apply to that company after I got my degree. It didn't even take that. What it took was my portfolio and my website already being built and an opportunity and someone being able to vouch for me. That's it. And so I was able to actually start working as a web and graphic designer at a web hosting company. And the owner also owned some other businesses. So I actually also got to do print work because he actually also owned a real estate agency. So I was doing some of that, all for one paycheck at the time. So what ended up happening was I ended up actually getting to use a lot of my skills as a photographer for the company. And I started shooting events locally, and I started doing stuff even for the local clubs and restaurants. I ended up making flyers too on the side. And I just was doing whatever I could with what I had at the time where I was. And I think that's a very important thing to do. I think it's a very important message, right? So when I became a graphic designer, it was because I wanted to pursue a career in creativity. I wanted to do something with my skills and my talents that I was still very passionate about, even if it wasn't at the time my number one passion. And it quickly became my number one passion when I realized that if I had thought and gotten my dream in working as an illustrator or an animator at a company, I would have ultimately had to make what other people want, not express my own creative vision and ideas. That's also what ended up happening to me as a graphic designer. At one point, I ended up working for an ad agency in New York for a little over a year. Then I ended up going into marketing and becoming a marketing manager, while also still doing the company's website and the beginnings of their social media, before then going independent. And when I became independent, I became a freelancer, started working for myself, became self-employed, and I used those skills and my abilities to utilize social media to be able to get my own clients, as well as my search engine optimization and all that good stuff, right? What ultimately happened is, as a result of that and then becoming a content creator on YouTube, I was still using all of my skills in terms of knowing how to work a camera, the video editing skills that I played with as a hobby when I was a kid, and then also the videography skills that I picked up helping the church film. So when you combine a lot of those things, the side hustles, the wedding photography, all of that, I learned how to basically build a successful client services business. And as my skills evolved, so did the scope of what I would do as an entrepreneur, a business person, and even a content creator. YouTube let me use every single skill in my toolbox and sharpen and polish it and learn how to match it to the needs, wants, and desires of an audience. And ultimately, I still ended up making money specifically as a graphic designer, not only by getting clients when I was a freelancer, but when I transitioned beyond that into consulting and things like that, I ultimately ended up building a digital product off of my graphic design skills for YouTube content creators who don't have any graphic design skills, called the YouTube Starter Kit. And that is something that well over 1,000 content creators have used and benefited from. So being able to create value for 1,000 people and have them buy something that you've made is a big deal. And it's something that any creative person, any artist would love to have happen. And so what I will tell you is things don't always go the way that you think they will. I started with one idea of my life and my career, had to pivot and pivot and pivot. And the interesting thing is I continued to learn and grow and experiment and take some risk, some chances, probably not as much as I could have or really should have to get a higher level of reward, but it worked out really well for me. And it put me in a situation that allowed me not only change my life, but the lives of my family members, some of my friends, and ultimately the people who now work with me, my team. And it's something that I really owe a lot of to the early people who invested in me within my own family in terms of taking the time to teach me things that they were passionate about. I think that's ultimately what brought me to YouTube was I wanted to share things I'm passionate about and teach people because it was done for me. I don't think you have to be a pro or an expert to share the things that you love and your understanding of them. I think you have to be upfront that you're not a pro or an expert, but consider the fact that I was still underserved by people who were pros and experts in academia and not getting what I needed from them. There's an underserved market of people who are not getting what they want out of the traditional market or academia or even at home from their family, and they're seeking it out. And if we as creative people make things for people like us, if you're a creative person, if you're an introvert, if you're a nerd, if you're whatever, if you make things for the people like you, one, you'll feel less lonely. And two, it's ultimately satisfying to feel like you might have made a difference that you would have appreciated if it was you. So that's the story of how and why I became a graphic designer and what led me to becoming a content creator. And I think that it's important once in a while for the audience to hear your story, to hear where you came from, why it matters and why you do what you do and what you're passionate about. At some point, I might do a video about photography. A lot of you know that it's like I'm a sucker for camera gear and I'm very passionate about it. Recently gotten very into wildlife photography. In fact, something I want to share with you, you don't have to feel any obligation. I made a new website, createawesomethings.com, because you know my philosophy, create awesome things and share them with the world. So createawesomethings.com. It is a Shopify store that I made so that if I'm doing photography, you can buy some of my wildlife stuff as prints and posters or as canvases. And then I do plan to do some stuff with my own personal digital art in the future. And if you want to buy some cool posters around any of that, any of the motivational stuff as posters, then it's going to exist in this online store that I built. I also, of course, plan to do a how to build a Shopify store from scratch tutorial. If that's something you're interested in, you definitely want to stay tuned. But I just wanted you to know that this thing exists. You don't have to support it. You don't have to buy anything, but I do want you to know that it exists if it is something you're interested in, or if you just are curious about my work. Question of the day. What is a passion that you're pursuing, and is it a hobby or a career? I'm really interested. Let me know in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video and getting to know me a little bit better, maybe you should watch this video where I tell my story about how I went from being broke to making six figures in detail, and it's actionable advice. For videos on creativity and staying inspired, check out my playlist. Both of these will be linked in the description down below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget, go out there and create something awesome today. Take care.